So this will be my lecture on the 7 Years' War. I've made a few videos in the past, but I should, generally speaking, they weren't that well made. And I'm just gonna do a quick remake. It's not gonna be the best quality video on the 7 Years' War, but it will give a general overview on what went down. And unfortunately, the audio on my computer is terrible, but this is for future reference for me personally, and It's it's uh it's manageable to listen to, I think. It might not be for everyone, but um better than nothing. Um but this is an important topic to go over, the 7 Years' War, because it is in reality the first world war in history. Um it really is the first world war, and it's mainly between Britain and France. There is a European theater where Russia, Austria are at war with Prussia, France is at war with Prussia and Hanover. But this is really an overseas conflict, and that's why it's the First World War, where it's taking place in North America, India, even in Africa and the Philippines, the West Indies. It's taking place overseas, really. There's been conflicts between the European powers overseas, but they were never the main focus before in the past, before the 7 Years' War, like the War of the Austrian Succession, the 9 Years' War, um, the War of the Spanish Succession. Like these conflicts always, the main focus of these conflicts was always Europe, not overseas. It was just a sideshow, basically, where for diplomatic talks, kind of. This will change the precedent for future warfare, really. Um, and we're gonna get into why. Um, so this is the map. The, the Earth is a huge place. Huge place for conflict. Um, so I do want to make a few mentions on Prussia. So I make a separate reading for this, but there's a diplomatic revolution in Europe where Great Britain allies itself to Prussia and France allies itself to Austria. France and Austria were always enemies. Now they're allies. Prussia and Britain were never like allies. Now they are because of Hanover. Um, so there was a diplomatic revolution in European theater, and it is a huge center of conflict, but I won't get into it in this video. But something miraculous happened, and that was with Prussia and the rise of its prominence as a world power come through this conflict, this war, but at a great cost, um, and thousands of lives, really. The entire Prussian army was decimated, but the country came out on top. It survived. Um, that's not the main. That's not the main theme of the 7 Years' War. The main theme of the 7 Years' War is actually North America, which is actually where the conflict began in 1754 and officially began in Europe in 1756. Um, so this is I need a moment here. This is what Europe, I mean not Europe, North America looked like on the eve of the 7 Years' War. And you can see here most of North America is in the hands of the French, while the British don't have as much, but they're on the coast here. Um, now this was strategic. The French didn't have that many willing colonial subjects migrating to the Americas. The British did. Um, and the lands that the Canadians have are not particularly well suited. It's extremely cold in Canada. There's four regions. Louisiana is here. Lower Louisiana is here. Upper Louisiana is here. Paydown region is here. Upper Country, and Canada for New France. Um, Extremely cold. Population is extremely small for the French, about 60,000, and they're because of that they're heavily dependent on the Indian allies they have in their territories. Basically, they're heavily allied to them, and the British, on the other hand, have 1.5 million subjects. in the Americas. That's a huge difference. It's like, wow, huge difference. So it's very interesting how Canada, I mean, not Canada, France came to dominate all these territories on the eve of the Seven Years' War. This is really a game for empire. And the powder keg for the Seven Years' War began in the Ohio River Valley, over Fort Duquesne, as you see right here, a tiny star. Um, Fort Duquesne. So France and Britain are fighting over the Ohio River Valley. Um, Britain is not actually fighting over the Ohio River Valley. It's the colonies, the Britain colonies, particularly Virginia and Pennsylvania. So they see the River Valley as a good place for expansion. But the governor of Virginia, Robert Dinwiddie, um, is basically speculating in land speculation companies where they're going to sell, they're going to take these lands from the Native Americans basically living here and give them to farmers. Basically, they're going to sell these lands to farmers and make a huge wad of cash. Um, this land is different for the French, as noted upon. Their population is extremely tiny, but it's very important strategically for transportation, the Ohio River Valley. So the French here build a series of forts far before the Virginia and Pennsylvania can react, along the Ohio River, basically. Um, and the most important one was Fort Duquesne. So before the Virginia could stop this, could stop it, Fort Duquesne was already constructed, and it's a very strategic fort and well grounded, and failed to stop it. Um, so the Virginia sent out a man named George Washington, Lieutenant Colonel George Washington, to basically go to the Ohio River Valley and basically not speculate, but basically assess what's going on in the Ohio River Valley so that Virginia can basically expand into the region. Um, and what ends up happening is that George Washington, with his with his group of colonials and a few natives, they stumble upon a French ensign named Jumonville, and they end up attacking his group, the French. He's a French envoy, and they end up attacking him and killing him, butchering him. So this is a huge no-no. This is basically an act of war. They stumbled upon French troops basically and slaughtered them in almost an accidental fashion. George Washington lost control of his one of his Indian subjects, and Indian ended up with like literally throwing an axe into Jumonville's head. Um, Whoops, we can't negotiate because he's dead. So what ends up happening is George Washington quickly assesses he has to build a fort to defend his position. Right here, this is what it kind of looked like, a ridiculous fort. It had strategically, it made zero sense. It's like the palisade, basically. You can't protect yourself with this kind of fort. Fort necessity. The French come and start firing upon George Washington's position, which is obviously undefendable. George Washington ends up having to make peace with the French, and barely signs over the territories that the French came to get. And Fort Duquesne is already built by this point. Um, so very embarrassing. This outrages the Virginia governor. He sends a missive to the British government where it's basically saying we need backup, we need support. We are now at war with the French. Um, and the British send back a man named General Braddock to take Fort Duquesne, because now they are at war. British and French are at war in North America. Um, so this is the Battle of Monongahela. Braddock tries to take Fort Duquesne. He marches. He's a unfortunately he dies early on. Very short-lived man in this theater of operation. But basically, this is not a land. North America is not a land for conventional warfare where you slowly come together, lined up with each other, and slowly march, um, with all you guys crowded around, where you're all seeable basically. It's not, these are not lands for guerrilla warfare. It's wilderness. It's a land for unconventional warfare where you split around. You're not jumbled together where everyone can see you. And this is what General Braddock basically did with the Anglo-American troops. Uh, he built he quickly built a road. It's very sloppily made, slowly marching to Fort Duquesne, and basically the French and the Native American allies see this whole crowd of Anglo-American troops all bunched together, and they're easily fired upon. As soon as they're near Fort Duquesne, they're all fired upon. It's a complete massacre. You can see here in this painting the French and natives firing upon the British and colonial Americans. It's a disaster. They flee for their lives. Braddock is killed in action. They quickly bury his body all on the road. And they don't even in an unmarked grave because they didn't have time. They ran away. It was a disaster. So as you can imagine, field of operations in the first years of the 7 Years' War are going terrible for the British in North America. So I did keep notes here. Um, so why is it going so badly for North the British North America? Why is it going so badly for the 13 colonies? First of all, they weren't prepared for these wars. 13 colonies themselves are disorganized as heck. They're all infighting with each other, all competing with each other, the 13 colonies. And they don't want to provide money for this war, even though Virginia started it through George Washington. Um, they don't want to cooperate with the British, and the British Army is always given priority and given privileges above the American colonial army. So they are always infighting. Um, also, the French made significant use of Indian allies, and it is very important for unconventional warfare because this is warfare basically happening in the wilderness, and the best source for this unconventional warfare is with native allies, really, because they know their way around the wilderness. They know how to fight guerrilla warfare because they've grown accustomed to it throughout the 1600s and the early 1700s, thanks to these Europeans transgressing upon their land. Um, so they don't. British eventually make use of the Iroquois, but not yet. Um, so first years of war are terrible, terrible, and also their frontiers, the frontiers of New York, Virginia, Pennsylvania, they're all undefended. So what ends up happening in the first years of the war is that all these settlers, all these British American settlers and other immigrants are fleeing these lands they're in because the French and their Indian allies are easily conquering, hit and run, um, burning down these lands, conquering them for themselves. Because they're unfortified, they're undefended. The British and the American colonies are completely unprepared. New York's frontier, unfortified. So Braddock did create all these war plans, and none of them worked. Fort Duquesne failed. These two operations, the Crown Point and Fort Niagara, never happened. This one did. The Fort Beauséjour. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but basically Nova Scotia goes through an episode that's basically ethnic cleansing. The Acadians, the French, and the natives have been mixed well together for generations. They're Acadians, specific ethnic group in Nova Scotia. They're completely expelled from Nova Scotia, and they're all distributed to different lands. And in a way, it really is a genocide because they lose their native lands. They all lose each other, the Acadians, because they're all forced to dissipate, basically, like a dissipore, like the Jews in Israel, basically, under the Roman Empire, where they're forced from their land, expelled. Um, this is something that happens to Acadians, and a lot of them do die. So that is one thing that does happen. Fort Duquesne is not captured. The French are putting the British North Americans on the run. And it's quite interesting too, as we recall the populations of British North America and New France. How many people do New France have? 60,000. How many people does British North America have? 1.5 million. So this is quite interesting to see here in the first years of the war. Um, this is going to change later on. Now, and we're going to understand why. So this is a global conflict. So what's going on in India is another um, declaration of war, basically. Um, basically, you can see here the blue is where the French are in India. Here is where the strong red in the Bengal region is where the British are. So British are very jealous of these lands that the French have down here. They're very land taxes and Nicola money. They're very jealous, and they go to war with the French in India. And the unfortunate fact is that the French, this is a separate conflict, by the way. It's just happened, yeah, go simultaneously because it is a global conflict between Britain and France. So Britain is very jealous of these lands France have, and they basically go to war. All these blue wave regions here, and the British defeat the French. And it's because the French don't have the finances, even though they have very good forts. French don't have the finances, they don't have the ships, and they don't have the troops. And we're going to learn about the French situation, their ability to plan war, their ability to organize, their ability to fund is very disadvantageous compared to the British. Um, they're very incompetent, the French command, the French king, the absolute monarchy king, the king. They did have good work. They did have good concepts, but they were gambles and they were disastrous. So one of the easiest things the French did was occupy Hanover. So back then, dynasty to the British monarchy was the Hanoverian dynasty, right? But King George II, they're Germans. This is the German dynasty that's leading Britain basically. Um, and Hanover is part of Britain for this dynastic ties, basically. So one of the first things France does once the war begins in Europe, one of the first things they do is occupy Hanover. Um, because no matter what, the British are going to negotiate for these lands back. But I guess their luck for the French is just absolutely terrible in Europe. Um, there's an epidemic in 1758 forces, the French occupying forces withdraw from the lands. Um, but not only that, yeah, they're not very the French aren't very concerned with destroying Prussia, as Russia and Austria are, even though they're allied to one another. Um, they're more interested in the competition with Britain. And what the French wanted to do was invade the island. It's a tiny island. They don't have the ground forces like the French do. And we are able to invade through Dunkirk, the British. We will easily defeat them, and boom, game over for them. That does not happen because the French Navy is obliterated in two battles, the Battle of Lagos and the Battle of Bourbon Bay. The French Navy is destroyed. So those war plans, the main war plan, basically invade Britain, fails because it can't happen without a navy. Um, and France did not have finances. Britain is much more advanced, the Bank of England and all that. Um, Britain's finances are way better. They're able to fund the war, but France, not so much because it's still incompetent under King Louis XV, their government. So these two years of warfare are not going well for the French. And eventually it will go terrible for France and North America because King Louis XV of France is not very concerned about North America. But he does send someone that's very competent called Marquis de Macomb to lead the French forces in North America. And he scores very considerable victories against French forts. Even when the French start having to go into defense, he wins considerable victories. Um, and he is very confident. He puts New York in a state of complete fear after he catches Fort Henry, the Fort William Henry. I don't know. Let me see my notes here. A very good notes to have. Fort William Henry. Um, he captures Fort William Henry, um, and it's very strategic. It's important for the defense of New York. Um, and that's the height of the French advance on British North America because very bad luck happened. So the Indian tribes have this very strange custom where basically they raid on each tribe between one another, and what they end up doing is capturing captives, and this is done in order to replace lost relatives, lost family members. They're our new members of our tribe, and this is a custom that happens because these tribes are small, right? And they need new family members to replace ones lost in raids. It's like a paradox, basically. You lose a family in a raid, you lose family members in a raid, you capture new ones, you lose family members. It's a custom among the Native American tribes in North America. So what they end up doing, um, these allies to the French, is they when Fort William Henry falls, is they capture British colonists basically, and they're carrying smallpox. So they bring them back to the Paydow region, the Great Lakes region. Let me see the map here. This region right here, where most of the native allies are, um, uh, which which ends up becoming a place of an epidemic, basically, the Great Lakes region, because they bring back these British captives holding smallpox to their homelands, and the epidemic of smallpox for these captives spreads. And now all these native allies are kicked out of the war. They can't do any more fighting. It is done and over with. French want them to keep fighting, but because of this and because of their custom traditions, oh, we have captives now. We don't need new members to replace our tribes or whatever. They're completely kicked out of the war after the Fort William Henry collapses. And not only this, the French, so Canada is not a very warm place. It's extremely cold. So this is very bad luck. Crop failure. It's so freezing those winters. 1758, 1757, I believe. Um, so crop failures. The French Canadians are freezing and starving. And finally, King Louis XV of France is not very interested in North America. He's not very interested in this fear. He's more interested in the European fear and invading Britain, which does not materialize. Um, this is going to be different for Great Britain because someone named William Pitt, um, in the ministry, comes to realize that the future warfare is not going to not going to be always about Europe. It's always been about Europe for the last centuries, even despite these colonies. It's not all about Europe, and he's going to make the war all about North America. The French are going to be completely expelled from North America. These are his war plans. We're gonna entice these um these Americans, these British Americans, into mobilizing for our war effort in North America to completely expel the French from this region. And it ends up working. The gamble pays off. Um, because remember, they do have to negotiate in the future over Hanover because the British monarchy is not simply going to let these lands go to the French, and the French know this. So what's the strategy? Collect as many overseas territories as possible. That is William Pitt's strategy. It pays off spectacular. So as you can imagine, with 1.5 million population versus 60,000 population, um, the British are going to have a very easy time obliterating the French through massive numbers, and that's what ends up happening. Fort Duquesne destroyed, replaced with, I mean, the region becomes known as Pittsburgh, named after William Pitt, in Pennsylvania. Fun fact for Pennsylvanians. Um, and the Fort Duquesne was destroyed. Fort Pitt is established in Pitt's name. All these forts were captured. French and Native Americans expelled from lands. What's that happening in Canada or New France is a free prawn invasion. We're going to invade New France from three different sides, right? three different generals. Um, the most famous of generals is James Wolfe. Um, a very famous painting of his death, where he captures Quebec against very hard odds. So Marquis de Macon is making a stand at Quebec. We're not getting resources from my team. We don't have enough men, but we do have good geographic standing in Quebec. So his plan is to make Quebec his stand against invasion because it's very geographically hard to conquer. And James Wolfe basically makes a gamble. It pays off because he's here in Quebec with he's sailing to Quebec and he's trying to capture it against Marquis de Macon. His forces are starving basically. So he makes a gamble where he has his troops sail into a cove in the middle of the night behind enemy lines. And what ends up happening, it pays off, the gamble pays off. Marquis de Macon was not prepared for that. And what ends up happening is frontal warfare on the plains of Abraham in Quebec, where they're basically French and the British are one on one. It's like think of like dodgeball, except it's muskets and you're charging at each other. Um, that was happening. It's a battle for morale. It's evenly matched basically, and the French they're starving. It's a crop failure. They have lesser numbers, even though this battle is quite even. But morale for the French is not as strong as the British. And the British come out on top. Peter Malcolm is killed in this battle on the plains of Abraham, and so is James Wolfe. But I don't. It's he's surrounded by his comrades, the Iroquois. Um, but he comes out on top. His regiment, his contingent comes out on top. General James Wolfe. He's very renowned for this battle. Battle of Plains of Abraham. The Battle of Plains of Abraham. Um, so basically, North America is completely belongs to British after this, except for some territories on Spain, of course. Now, Spain does get involved in the war later on because they see the balance of power broken, and Spain is a traditional ally to the French after the war in Spanish succession. Um, so Spain gets involved, boom, becomes a failure. Spain just says this for the French. It's an embarrassing defeat overseas. Um, William Pitt's gamble on making it. This is really, this is really the first World War for this reason too as well. It's an overseas war in India, Africa, the Philippines, and North America. It's an overseas war for overseas territories, and the British kick ass. Um, Now, King George II during the war dies, and his son King George III becomes king. And King George III thinks this war is abhorrent. It's disastrous. It's like to him it's like literal World War One to him. There's like too many casualties. This is way out of this war is blown out of proportion. We need to end this war. So he gets rid of William Pitt. He gets him out of the ministry. He's like he's a warmonger. We need to put this war to an end. Now I put a reading for students. It's one page. Um, and he follows a policy of appeasement, basically. So he gives back a lot of territories that were conquered by Britain back to the French, except for North America. They are completely expelled from North America, but the French are still given back their islands in the West Indies, and they're very lucrative. They are the money makers, not North America. North America is small population, extremely cold, um, particularly in France. Um, so basically, he follows a policy of appeasement, and Spain is in the mix of it as well because at the last minute, in the last years of the war, Spain gets involved. So negotiations to end the war as quickly as possible to make some major changes in North America. Um, but the British, uh, even though the British used the policy of appeasement, the French and the Spanish, I'm not going to forget this word because it was so embarrassing. It's a national humiliation for this war, and they're going to get involved in future warfare in the future, particularly during the American Revolution to get revenge. But that ends up having disastrous economic consequences. This 7 Years' War was economically disastrous for Britain and for France. Um, so this is going to end up tearing apart both the British and French empires later on in the future. And this is going to cause the American Revolution, 7 Years' War, and it's going to also we eventually build up to the French Revolution, because it's France will never recover from this war. Not only is it a national humiliation, this defeat, it is financially unrecoverable from they never recover from it, the French. Um, and this is going to be seen on in it's over the decades basically. So this is 1763. The French Revolution happens in 1789. So this is a world conflict, um, and it had major repercussions.